Welcome everyone to the Utah League of Cities and Towns weekly town hall around the economic impact of COVID-19. I'm Cameron Dale, the director of the league. It is a pleasure to join you again on a lovely Monday afternoon. And we're thrilled today to have two of the experts in the economic impact world, not just here in Utah, but across the country. Juliette Tennert, who is the director of Economics and Public Policy Research at the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. And now I think, Juliette, we can refer to you as a frequent guest of our town halls. I think you've hit the frequency. We should have gotten you a punch card. You could get a free meal on us some point down the line. And then Vicki Varela, who is the managing director of the Office of Tourism and Film in the Governor's Office of Economic Development. We also will have Roger Tu, who is a senior policy analyst at the league, and who has been running point with the tax commission as a former tax commissioner, and also had been involved in doing the work with Doug McDonald and EconoWest on the tax projections that we shared a few weeks ago. Before I turn it over, though, to Juliette and Vicki, let me start by giving you an update of where things are at on a federal level, because any discussion right now around economic impact and economic relief includes our federal partners. We got some good news this morning. Juliette, Vicki, and I are on the governor's economic response task force, and we were with the governor this morning for his weekly call. And we got really good news about the economic impact in Utah compared to the rest of the country. In fact, we are one of the best positioned. Hopefully I'm not stealing any of your thunder, Juliette, but we are one of the best positioned in the country to move not just through the stabilization phase, but toward full recovery. In fact, the discussion was how do we build an economic structure that's actually stronger than the position we were in a few months ago when the economy absorbed the blow of COVID-19. Well, around the country, many cities are not as fortunate, and many states are not as fortunate. And that was and certainly many businesses have suffered considerably. That was part of the impetus behind the Federal CARES Act, which was the third stimulus, and then the subsequent addition, which we refer to as 3.5. On Friday, the House of Representatives passed what is known as the HEROES Act. It was a bill that was over 1,800 pages in length, and it was a $3 trillion relief package that had components for businesses, residents, landlords, tenants, state governments, and local governments. Specifically on the local government side, it contemplated a $375 billion with a B dollar relief account for local governments split between cities and counties, and would be distributed over a 2-year period of time. The Utah delegation in the House voted against the HEROES Act. The League Board of Directors considered the HEROES Act today, declined to take a position on the overall HEROES Act. Instead, what they have encouraged us as staff to do on behalf of local governments in Utah is to work with the delegation, not on the HEROES Act per se, but around some key principles on how to assist local governments and partner between the federal government and local governments. First, we talked about direct allocations. So if there is going to be a fourth stimulus package, having money that the federal government directly allocates to cities and towns. When I talk about the CARES Act in a moment, that's been one of the complicating factors, is the lack of the direct allocation to all communities. The second thing we talked about was flexibility with the dollars, making sure that different types of communities with different types of needs could utilize these federal dollars to meet their unique needs. And in part, Vicki's going to present later about the different disparate impacts we've seen in the tourism industry around the state, and certainly the needs in Moab and the needs in Layton they're both impacted by COVID, but impacted dramatically differently. The third thing that the board emphasized was economic stimulus and business stabilization, and making sure that a federal package is also looking out for the underlying stabilization of the economy, because we all want a strong economy. Strong local governments are built on strong economies. And then the fourth piece was to talk about transportation and infrastructure investment. And that could also occur at the state level as we proceed into the summer, and there are discussions around a potential state special session. Those are all distinctions from the CARES Act. The CARES Act that Congress passed a few weeks ago and that the Executive Appropriations Committee considered last week really deals with money for necessary expenditures, not revenue replacement. The Treasury Department has provided some guidance on what that looks like, but you can't use that money with the same sort of flexibility that our board was discussing today around a fourth stimulus, whether that's within the HEROES Act or a new bill that would be coming through the Senate. So I bring that up because I think it's good context as we talk about the economic impact of COVID, which sectors have been impacted in the economy, how your local budgets have been impacted, and that the CARES Act will be helpful for necessary expenditures. And we've reached an arrangement with the state of Utah for the cities outside of Salt Lake and Utah counties to have access to CARES Act dollars for necessary expenditures based on population. So every community will get some of that money. But in terms of actually being able to mitigate the economic impact, we're really looking at that fourth stimulus as that potential partnership with the federal government. So with that as the background, Juliette, let me turn it over to you to talk through what we now know that we didn't know before, what the known knowns are, and what the unknowns are.
All right, as an economist, I would be happy to talk to you all about all of the knowns as well as the many, many unknowns. But it is nice that as we're moving through time, we are, like I know I've mentioned this several times, economists, we're always looking in our rearview mirror. So more of the data is coming into view, and we're getting a better handle on the severity of the contraction, and that way we're able to inform a better outlook moving forward. So thank you, Cameron. I'm excited to be here again today. Thank you. I will be taking you up on the meal at some point from one of our many, many awesome Salt Lake or Utah restaurants. But let me pop up my slides for you all. One second here. Again, this is always like the moment of truth. Can the economist share the vital slides? All right, looking good? Cameron, can I see a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, excellent, very good. All right, thank you. So I'm here to just share with you some data points. As I mentioned, we're getting more and more of the data into view, and that's helping us to form some expectations around the future. Hopefully, these data points are helpful to you, and they hopefully also just give you kind of a flavor of the types of work that we do at Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute, and we are always happy to help you on your individual cases. So as Cameron mentioned earlier, you know, Layton's going to be different than Moab, and we're really excited to help you on some of those very specific economic analyses. I do want to remind everyone that this Friday we will have, I'm not even sure what number installment it is, in our Business School's How to Save Your Business seminar series. Hopefully some of you took advantage of the opportunity to hear from Mark Zandi and Natalie Gochner, who I would say are two of our nation's best economists. That was about a week, what was it, 2 weeks ago, about a week and a half ago. This Friday, we'll be having a discussion on those data points that matter most to both the short-term and long-term forecast. So I think that particular seminar might be especially relevant for your group. This is a free series. Just if you can, there's a link for registering. I'll make sure that these slides get to Cameron for distribution. So if you can, please register, but definitely join us if you can. I've been relying a lot on the initial unemployment insurance claims data. We finally have some decent sales tax data to talk from, and so I'll share those with you after I go through the unemployment insurance claims data. But as I've shared with you numerous times, those UI data, those jobless claims data, are so good because they're coming in on a weekly basis. We understand where Utahns are filing for unemployment insurance, and we understand what industries they're coming from, and we even understand kind of like what their wages are. And so they're very, very good data for interpreting the status of the economy and helping us to form those expectations. The bad news, which we know, Utah's economy has sharply contracted, and we've wiped out, I presented this I think 2 weeks ago, and the numbers are actually holding relatively steady at this point, but we've wiped out 3 years of job growth in just a month and a half or so. But the good news is that the situation is absolutely improving, and we are pretty confident that the peak intensity of this contraction for Utah, and likely for the US as well, was in the month of April. So on the left in red, you see those weekly initial jobless claims. So those are the number of Utahns that are filing for claims. We start with the week ending March 22nd. So that was the week where the restaurant orders went into place. And you can just see we went from normally having unemployment insurance claims come in at about 1,000 per week, spiked almost to 20,000 unemployment insurance claims in 1 week. And that number just kept growing and growing, peaking out at 33,000. But as you can see in the most recent data, we've seen a nice decline in those numbers. So again, I mean, we still have, the number of folks on Utah's unemployment rolls is still growing, but it's growing at a much, much slower pace than it was initially. On the right-hand side in gray, we see those cumulative claims. So if you add, basically, if you add up all of those claims from week to week, move this over a little bit. And you can see now that at this point, we've had about 150,000 Utahns that have applied for unemployment insurance related to the COVID-19 economic crisis. I should mention that as we continue to present these data to you, I'm going to start looking more at continuing unemployment insurance claims. So these are all kind of the new claims, new folks that are jobless. As we move into the recovery phase, which we are moving into, the more relevant number will be how many people continue on unemployment insurance. And so we'll start to track those data pretty closely from here on out, and I'll be happy to share those in our next update. Cameron mentioned this earlier. Utah is actually very well positioned. We were well positioned going into this contraction, and we're very well positioned moving out of it. Now, that's not to say that the contraction has not been severe, but if you start to look at where Utah is in terms of relative places, we should be grateful to be in Utah. So we're looking here at those cumulative jobless claims, that 150,000 or so Utahns who filed for unemployment insurance as a percent of the workforce across the nation. So a little bit over 9.5% of Utah's workforce by these measures has filed for unemployment insurance. Nationally, that number is 21%. I calculated these numbers a couple of times over the weekend. We've been working on the next version. We've been helping the Governor's Office of Management and Budget to develop the next version of Utah Leads Together, the plan for Utah Leads Together. And I had to have a couple of my colleagues in the Governor's Office of Management and Budget rerun these numbers for me just to make sure that I was calculating them correctly. But you can see here that the impacts to Utah have been harsh, but not nearly as harsh as on average the impacts in the US. And then, places like Nevada, Michigan, Alaska, all those places in very, very dark red. Nevada, their claims essentially almost 30% of their workforce. And I should mention that those claims, you're not capturing every person who's unemployed through these claims. There are a number of reasons why people might not show up in the data. And so, this is kind of like I guess I would call it like a lower estimate of the impact that you can just see there. We do anticipate that we should start to see a return. So we're going to continue to see declines in jobs, increases in the number of folks who are unemployed. But within the next 30 to 60 days, we actually feel quite confident that we will see a return to job growth in our state. We're on net, new jobs will start to outpace job losses again. And looking at these data, you can see that Utah will be leading in this recovery. So let's take a closer look at the industries that have been impacted. And I guess when I give presentations and we're throwing up data on the big slide behind me in person, I always make the big disclaimer that I'm showing you data points that might be kind of small or hard to read, and you should just pay attention to magnitudes and trends. So I'll give you that disclaimer now, but maybe this is a nice way for economists to share their data, because you can switch in and look at these data points. But again, I'll make sure that you have these slides, so don't feel like you have to pay super close attention to all these details. But if we look at where the claims are happening, I've sorted this list by where the most claims are. And you can see here that those industries that have been impacted the most, and I know that Vicki will be talking to this in a little bit: accommodations and food services, retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, administrative and waste services, so really administrative services, have been those industries where we've seen the most claims come from. And you can see over on the far right-hand side, we don't have great wage data, always looking in the rearview mirror. We don't have great wage data for 2019 on these industries yet. We'll actually get that later this week. But you can see the weekly wages for these industries. Those industries that have been most impacted actually have relatively low wages. So, you know, this means that this is a very stressful situation for the individuals who are employed in those industries. It's very burdensome for the companies that are in these industries, but from an overall economic perspective, it's not having as great of an impact on the Utah economy as, for example, and again, it's been really fast and severe, but in terms of like the long-term kind of average over some time, the averaged out impacts potentially will not be as severe as Great Recession, again, when averaged out over time, because we're not yet seeing a tremendous amount of stress in some of those higher paid industries. So looking at this now where it really matters, especially as a Utah economist and those of you on this group, looking kind of digging down into the numbers geographically across our state, the impacts vary across the state. So of course, our urban areas have the most claims, the most joblessness, and of course then therefore the most level of economic impact in terms of wages and, you know, tax revenue and all of these things that are associated with the economy. But then if we look at kind of the inner workings of individual economies, and again, I've done it at the county level here just because it's an easier way to present the data. I mean, we could always dig deeper down into your individual city level data. We can see that as a percent of the workforce, the biggest impacts have been in those areas that have a high degree, and you know, we'll see recovery here, and I'm sure Vicki will talk to this, but the most severely impacted areas are those areas where travel and tourism is a major part of the economy. So Grand, Summit County, again, you can look at the individual data there, but the good news is, again, the impact is starting to become less severe. And so you'll see that as we continue to track these data points. So pivoting over to sales tax data, which, as I mentioned, we finally have, and I'll count on Roger to add some color to some of the caveats around these data points, but they can still kind of help you plan around, some of your expectations for your budgets in months to come, and then a little farther into the future. The sales tax data are starting to come in, so they're starting to give us a better picture of what to expect. As anticipated, food services and drinking places, the hardest hit in terms of the loss. So between March of 2019 and March of 2020, with the data that we currently have, and there are a number of reasons, again, to be careful about how you interpret this, but food services and drinking places taxable sales are down 160 million over the year for the month of March, down over 26%. And so here I've ordered, the most severely impacted, I'm calling it retail sales, so I don't have all of the taxable sales based in here, but the most severely impacted sectors of the economy, all the way down to those sectors that are actually doing better than normal. So at the very bottom, we can see that non-store retailers up year over almost $190 million, almost double. A lot of that's actually, so non-store retailers are going to be a lot of your online retailers. And so a lot of that's actually related to some changes with starting to collect more and more sales tax from online sales. But, again, it's also part of those numbers is people are ordering more things at home. If my porch on a daily basis is any anecdotal evidence of that. You also see that there's been a large jump, at least in the year over data for March, in food and beverage stores, so groceries, very large impact or very large positive increase there. And so this is where, when you're thinking about your budgets, the statewide data are really nice, and you'll see likely a revenue forecast coming out from the Governor's Office of Management, Budget, and Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office at some point, right, to inform the budget. But, you know, individual cities are going to have different makeups in their economy. And so if you are a place that has a couple of Home Depots and Lowe's and grocery stores, you're actually probably in a better position than another place where you're more heavily reliant on some of those, like, you know, food services, you know, accommodations, those sorts of places. So if you want the full data, I'm sure you'll see this in your monthly distribution reports, I'm sure. And then if you want to dig down deeper into this data, I've provided you with the website where to get those data points. Motor fuel is also one that I've been having a really hard time kind of wrapping my head around. So last time I presented to you, I shared with you some national data where we saw the declines in all retail sales at gas stations, and that it's kind of hard to tease out what that actually means for Utah motor fuel sales and motor fuel tax collections, because the price of gasoline is actually down quite a bit over the year. And so when we look at national data and national sales, entangled in some of that activity is going to just be those price decreases. But we are starting to actually see data come out on the actual number of motor fuel gallons sold in Utah. And you can see that in March, we've got, like, it's, you know, whatever, it's down 13% year over. And, you know, that's, I guess, consistent with what we would anticipate. I don't have the national data with me, but I know that, again, entangled in the national data is that price change in gasoline. But the decline in national sales is much higher. It's probably up a little bit in one of the previous slides. Maybe I'll pop back up there to look at that. So gasoline stations in March nationally down about 18%. So like I said, part of that is actually going to have some of that pricing in there. But I guess maybe a point here is when I'm going to just leave this chart or this table with you, but a point here that I didn't mention before was that I've provided the US impacts for March and April because we're basically like a month ahead with what we see in US data. So as you're kind of thinking about what's happening in your specific area, you can see that the differences are, or the impacts are less in Utah. So if you look at what's happened in US in April, it's probably reasonable to anticipate that your April numbers will be a little better than those US April numbers. So let me know if you have, like I said, definitely sharing this with you, and let me know if you have any questions there. Okay, and then finally, so looking at motor fuels, pulling back up just to taxable sales generally. Again, just like in those jobless claims, the impacts very much vary across the state. So year over, March 2019 to March 2020, taxable sales are basically flat. So we looked at those categories or sectors that had pretty large impacts in terms of declines. And there's sectors that had pretty large impacts in terms of increases. And so those kind of wash out into being basically a flat result for March. Moving into April, we would anticipate that those numbers will tip down even more. And then, I mean, it's really hard to interpret that just what's going on with this contraction because it's so different than other ones that we've studied. But normally sales lag jobs just a little bit. So if we say that we're anticipating a return to job growth or net job growth in 30 to 60 days, we would anticipate your sales turning around likely after that. Again, if history holds true, and it seems reasonable right now, but again, it's just like the severity of the decline, and then what will be a little bit longer of a recovery, we're calling it the check mark, right? Recession. You know, it's actually hard to really understand those relationships. So we'll continue to track those data points. But again, you can see impacts very much vary across the state. Statewide average about flat, but again, we go into Grand County and at least for these data points, taxable sales down 30% year over, so quite severe. But you go back into Salt Lake County, and again, at the county level data, really down about 2%, which is, when you compare that back to the jobless claims, not quite as intense as you might anticipate. And I think that is influenced again by where this contraction is hitting, which jobs and which incomes this contraction is currently hitting. So I will wrap this up, and I'm really excited to hear what Vicki has to share. I will wrap this up with a little plug for the Utah Leads Together Plan version 3.0. The Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute is helping the Governor's Office of Management and Budget pull this together, and there are a number of stakeholders involved. But you should see this released likely on Wednesday. As a preview, I've just got some notes here in front of me. As a preview, you're going to likely see in this plan, again, it's still undergoing review, and there's, if it's released on Wednesday, that means that there's much change that could happen, but it will likely present strategy around safeguarding high-risk populations and safeguarding Utah's multicultural community. And then also, which I'm really excited about, that we'll start to see in this plan, planning for that economic recovery, because it is coming into view. You see from these data points, it's coming into view. And so the next plan will have some strategy around planning for that recovery. And as part of that, Cameron just asked that I mention this to y'all, following up from the phone call that we participated in this morning. Part of planning for that economic recovery will be investing in those things that grow the economy. And there are two things that grow the economy. So Econ 101, all you need to know. Two things that grow the economy: capital and labor. And so in preparing for that recovery, we're so well positioned to begin with. And we can improve our current economic standing, and then also improve the outlook for Utah's long-term prosperity by investing in basically shovel-ready projects. So taking those funds that are coming through the federal stimulus and potentially other resources, and investing in transportation, water. When I say transportation, I'm talking roads and even trails, water, all those things that really can just set us up for long-term economic prosperity. And then on the labor side, investing in what we're calling work-ready investments. And so that's investing in skills for Utahns. When we see that we've got currently 150,000 folks who have filed for unemployment insurance, investing in training and skills for them will not only help in like the short-term recovery, but should set us up for long-term success. So with that, I'll just remind you that gardner.utah.edu we'll post these slides there. We'll definitely share them with you through your listserv, but has data points on the current COVID-19 situation, and then also has the contact information for all of our principals should you have any questions related to the economy, public finance, population, or anything else we can help you with. So hopefully that's been helpful. I'm not sure, we'll probably just handle questions later, I'm thinking. I don't know, I'll just follow Cameron's lead on the transition.
Terrific. Thank you, Juliette. And if there are questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. Really phenomenal data, and really an interesting story that's coming into picture here, that the impacts of COVID-19 are being felt in different ways, in different places. Businesses are feeling them differently, communities are feeling them differently. Part of the reason I prefaced your presentation with referencing the potential federal fourth stimulus is because the third stimulus, the CARES Act, was really about crisis management. It was about providing relief. What Senator Romney has requested of the League and of local governments in general around the state has been specific data about the impact of COVID-19 on your communities. So the data you're just sharing, the request from the League back to our members is to take that data, tell the story of what COVID-19 really means in your community, and in some communities it's going to be worse than in other communities, and then allow that data to inform the conversation around a potential fourth stimulus. Because that third stimulus, the CARES Act, was about necessary expenditures and relief. The fourth stimulus is about both relief and stimulus. And so that's going to be a major thing to watch here in the weeks to come, both at the state level with potential stimulus and at the federal level with potential stimulus. So thank you very much, Juliette. Vicki, when we talk about the disparate impacts around the state, there has not been an industry that's been hit harder than the tourism industry. I think about my own life during spring. Normally, I'm on the road doing my spring training, and league staff spends half the spring in St. George, staying at hotels, eating at restaurants, buying gas, driving to and from St. George. We didn't do any of that this spring, and a lot of people, both nationally and internationally, didn't do that either, and we've certainly seen those impacts. So Vicki, talk to us about what you're seeing on the ground with tourism, and please introduce your colleague to us as well.
Thank you very much, Cameron. It's really good to be with you, even under these strange circumstances. I want to thank Cameron for the leadership that you're showing on the Economic Recovery Task Force, and Juliette for the great leadership from Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. I have been sort of overwhelmed in the last week or so with the recognition that if you're going to be in a COVID crisis, you want to be in Utah because all of the fundamentals are coming together in our state in a way that Juliette has described, that we will lead out of this crisis. I have a group of colleagues, the tourism directors from surrounding Western states. We call each other Westie Besties. And we do a lot of great collaboration because we have a lot of shared interest around national parks issues, protecting outdoor recreation infrastructure, and so forth. And so we had our first little Zoom cocktail party the other night just to exchange notes. And it was devastating to see how much more challenging the circumstances are in surrounding states. And it's those fundamentals that we talk about all the time in Utah that Kempsey Gardner does such a great job of summarizing for us, that we have a diverse economy, that we're not dependent on gambling revenues. These are the sorts of things that are devastating other states. And Juliette pointed out that Nevada is 30% unemployment, and that is because the economy is so heavily dependent on tourism there. Tourism in Utah is about 10% of our economy, and it has in fact been the most devastated industry in the state. I'm going to share some slides with you. This is the part of the presentation that makes me the most nervous. Let's see.
Even after 2 months, we are all nervous about sharing screens. So we'll hold our breaths for you as you pull that up. And Bianca, it's great to see you again. It's nice to see a fellow classmate from yesteryear. It wasn't that long ago we were in college together, right?
I know, and it's so good to see you. I'm so happy to be with you.
Okay.
Vicki, there it is.
Perfect. Excellent. So yes, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Bianca Lyon. As context for Bianca's introduction, in pre-COVID times, which is hard for all of us to remember now, we went through a lengthy strategic planning process at the Office of Tourism and created what we call the Red Emerald Strategy. Red Emerald Strategy is our plan for building a sustainable tourism economy in the state. We call it Red Emerald because there's a rare stone, mined only in Utah, called the Red Emerald. And it's exquisite, it's highly sought after, renowned by gemologists. And that's what we want the Utah tourism economy to be, is something that is absolutely exquisite, that people are willing to invest in tourism, that visitors are willing to come here, stay longer, spend more time because they understand the value of what we offer. And as part of that whole strategy, we set a goal that we want to improve our partnership with Utah League of Cities and Towns and Utah Association of Counties, with all of the groups around the state that are thinking about the economy from many different perspectives to make sure that we do right by you, that we build a tourism economy consistent with community wants and needs, and that we plan carefully so that we don't have pinch points to where residents say they don't want visitors. And so it was in that context that we brought Bianca onto our team, and I look forward to more collaboration, communication, much of which will be led by Bianca. So how are we doing through COVID? Well, it has been extremely difficult for our industry. I know it's been difficult for all industries in the state, but when you think about tourism, it's going back to Juliette's presentation, the economy is driven by two things, capital and workforce. Well, the tourism economy is driven by one thing, and that is people going places. And nobody is going anywhere. Of course, that's improving a little bit right now as we go into the orange and yellow phases, but basically everything shut down in a nanosecond. We know that recovering the tourism economy is going to be a long, deliberate process. We have a vision out of this that we will come out of it more mighty than ever. But we know that will be a marathon, not a sprint. All of our indicators are that it will be well into 2021, likely third quarter of 2021, before we're able to get back to 2019 revenues. So a way of breaking down what the tourism economy means to each of us is that in a normal year, tourists would be spending about $26 million per day in the state. Right now, they're spending 10 to 15% of that, somewhere around 2.6 to $3+ million. That translates into about $1,200 of tax relief per Utah household. That's either decreased services or decreased taxes that we would have if not for the tourism economy. So our goal is to get back to that, to be more mighty than ever, borrowing from our Mighty Five breakout campaign several years ago. But it's going to be a very different path to success than we've had historically. Usually our highest spending customers are our international visitors. It's obvious that they spend the time and the money to get here, so they're going to immerse themselves, stay longer, spend more, and so forth. Well, we don't anticipate the international part of the tourism economy coming back until mid to late 2021. This means that for the first time since the Tourism Marketing Performance Fund was established in 2005, 2006, our target markets are going to be Utahns and surrounding states, getting people to hop in the car and go have Utah adventures. Traditionally, the legislature doesn't give us credit for Utahns traveling the state in our performance measures. And in conversations with legislative leaders, they're saying all the rules are changed now, and we just want to convince Utahns, first of all, that it's safe to get out and travel and have these Utah experiences. We are monitoring consumer sentiment region by region and by category of visitors. And we will roll out our marketing as we have basically a convergence of community readiness to welcome visitors, consumer readiness to travel, and certainly a flattening of the COVID curve. So we heard information just an hour ago that still 51% of our target customers in regional markets do not feel ready to get out and travel. So we'll have 3 phases of our campaign reentry. First, inspiration, and I'm going to show you a little bit of our inspiration promotions, followed by Renaissance. This is coming back into the market, and then normalcy. And we feel like we'll be lucky if we get to any semblance of normalcy in our storytelling by about September.
Vicki, can I ask you a quick follow-up question there?
Yes.
You mentioned that 51% of the target audience at this point does not yet feel comfortable traveling. So that's not just Utahns, but it's people in the region.
Correct.
That as of today, May 18th, aren't ready to hop in a car and go recreate somewhere.
Correct. Yep. So Mighty, you'll be hearing a lot more about Mighty over the next year or so. I'm going to roll for you in just a minute our small but mighty messaging, which I think is self-explanatory around how we build off of the Mighty 5 storyline. And then we'll we're working on a campaign that will tell the Mighty 5 story, but it's 2020 style. When we rolled out Mighty 5 in 2013, it changed everything. It was so wildly successful that it created constraints, which you all know. And we have been adapting ever since then to make sure that we inspire people to visit regions of the state rather than to attract all of the visitation just to a national park. And so Mighty 5 2020 style is about that regional storytelling of exploration, immersing yourself, not just in the national park, but in the all of the surrounding areas. Think of the Mighty 5 like our Eiffel Tower, in that it has enormous sex appeal, attractiveness, but it's not the destination in and of itself. And then Bianca is starting to work on a Forever Mighty stewardship campaign. And this is something that would really like to increase our partnership with you around our stewardship commitments. So we are not promoting that you got to come to Utah right now because people aren't ready for it. But we are reminding people of what an inspiring place this is, and of the stewardship that we should all feel, not just about public safety, but about these special places, small but mighty. And small but mighty is not playing for you.
A little rain over time, freezing and thawing. That's all it took to create the thousands of arches in Utah. So, if you feel insignificant, simply staying at home, don't. You're doing your part. You're making a difference, just like a little bit of rain. By being careful, you protect those around you. It's a small thing, but it's mighty.
And a second ad in that same vein.
Tiny grains of sand, sticking together under pressure. That's all this formation is made of, nothing more. So if you feel small or helpless, remember, you matter. Your sacrifices count. They add up, just like tiny grains of sand. By doing your part, you're helping build a safer world for everyone. It's a small thing, but it's mighty.
So these are playing in connected TV in the Western region. And if you're not familiar with connected TV, that's when I watch something on cable TV and Cameron watches something on cable TV, but the commercial that comes up for him is different than the commercial that comes up for me, because they know Cameron likes to golf and they know I don't, or any number of other things that they're able to collect about the profile of the viewers from their artificial intelligence. And we've been getting, and so then that's generated social media attention, and we've also been pretty active on social media, but we're not advertising to pack your bags and come to Utah right now. So I want to turn to some industry insights. We worked with Entrada Insights, which is a nationally based tourism research firm that is based here in Salt Lake. And they did a comprehensive industry survey for us, about 489 respondents. And then in addition to that, we're doing qualitative interviews with hoteliers, restaurants, retailers around the state to try to understand what the impacts are and what the greatest needs are. So 72% project a 55% revenue decline through 2020. Only 50% have funding to last for 60 days. This goes to your excellent highlights, Cameron, at the beginning of the meeting about the needs for assistance as a next step. We really need a Utah direct allocation for unique needs. I am sure that some of you have heard the same things that we heard from our survey, is that the relief packages that have come through so far have been very mixed. 46% have received federal or state assistance. The biggest frustration is the idle applications. 33% of our industry has applied and only 4% have been funded. Now these results came in about 10 days ago, so that could have improved just a little bit in that time period, but there's just been a lot of frustration around that program. Then 19% applied for the Utah Leads Together bridge loans, and 14 were funded. So there was much higher level of satisfaction with the programs that are administered by the state there because of their efficiency and turnaround. But of course, at this point, these state bridge loans were very modest. So there's a real need for the state to be able to do economic stimulus in the way that our state needs it, and to be able to execute it in an efficient manner. Greatest needs, grants and low interest loans, plus in our industry, there's a real need for assistance with the application process. This went more to the federal loans and the cumbersomeness and confusion of the federal loans and the state loans. And then the screaming need that we're hearing is for marketing support and for continued availability of the Tourism Marketing Performance Fund, through which we do the all of the state marketing. Clarity around best practices is coming up a lot in our industry and others. I know Cameron has worked really hard at creating these town hall meetings where people can find out how to interact under best practices with the city, with your respective cities. And I think this is right on the mark of what we need more of. What we are trying to create more of this in the tourism industry. And there is actually an initiative from the Governor's Office of Economic Development. We're part of the GoEd team, where there will be a marketing strategy around consensus on best practices. I think potential state COVID certification. I don't know if that's for sure where this will go, but some sort of a promise to people when they walk into a restaurant or retail outlet or hotel that there have been COVID precautions taken to protect people's public safety. And then once those once there's consensus about whether it will be a certification or how that will be measured, then there will also be a communications campaign to support that. We all know the importance of face masks, and yet we're seeing the resistance in some sectors to wearing face masks, or the lack of understanding by some people. And so think about celebrities putting on face masks and translating to us that wearing a face mask can be cool. It can be cool. So all of those things are in process right now. I want to wrap up, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but there are a number of things that I feel very optimistic about. First, as I already said, if you're going to be in a COVID crisis, you want to be in Utah, and that's just coming home to us more and more every day with the information we're getting from Kim C. Gardner and with the comparisons that we're seeing with other states. A second for our industry is that we know people crave what we have, our beautiful landscapes. I like to talk about the fact that Mother Nature played favorites with Utah landscapes. We see from the demand at the state parks and national parks that people are so hungry to get out of our little COVID caves and experience the outdoors again. The best practices initiatives that are coming together, I am optimistic that those will enable us to bring the economy back, to start to get back to normalcy. And then finally, I want to highlight something I'm very enthused about, and it gets a little confusing when I am the one who's talking about this, but this is an investment that the Speaker of the House is starting a discussion about around investment in outdoor recreation infrastructure. And the problem with the state tourism director saying this is a great idea is then you think, oh, well, the state tourism director wants that so she can attract more visitors. And really, it's much more foundational than that. I believe that it is the right thing to do to protect and enhance our quality of life as Utahns. Given my stewardship over and my goal to create a sustainable tourism economy, I think the foundational thing that has to happen is that we all, as Utahns, have to feel like we have access to outdoor recreation infrastructure. If we don't have those basic things that we may have relocated here in order to enjoy, or may have chosen to live here all of our lives because we enjoy so much, then it's very difficult for me to defend building out a robust tourism economy because our own community doesn't have what we need. So I'm very enthusiastic about conversations that the Speaker has started about tourism recreation infrastructure investments. Think of investments in trails, in parks, in places that can create active transportation lifestyles, that can enable us to have really great recreation within proximity to our homes. One of the ideas that the Speaker has talked about is having a civilian conservation corps type of engagement with the high unemployment right now, putting people to work to build these beautiful places that can be available to us for generations. We've all been to Delicate Arch, had that amazing experience. Right. That was a project of the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. There was a notion that President Roosevelt had, that we can come out of this better than we were by investing in these beautiful places for our quality of life and for our economy.
Well, and Vicki, that's kind of a perfect tie-in back to what Juliette was referencing before that will be in the Utah Leads Together 3.0 plan later this week, which is to pivot from the crisis and the urgency phase into stabilization. We're in stabilization now, but into recovery and investing in shovel-ready projects in a variety of types of infrastructure. So thank you very much for your insight and the information you presented. Roger, take us home here. What, as you've had a chance now to look at the data that's been collected and look at the trends, what do you want to partake, or what do you want to impart to our city leaders around the state?
I'm very used to playing the accordion player, and this is what I plan to basically have 5 minutes to sort of sum up what I've heard. First of all, on the data, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we had Chairman Ballantyne from the Tax Commission talk about trying to get information out to you early on the May distribution. That was accomplished, but a couple of things about that data you need to realize. That was data that was through May 11th. That is not data that was through the 20th of May, which is the normal distribution point. So on Wednesday, you're going to see the complete data for the month of May come out. I think 90% plus the money was in by the 11th, but there will be some increase probably in the amount that goes out between the 11th and the 20th. If you see those numbers that look different, that's why. And that's not going to be repeated in the future, but I just wanted you to know the data was, early data was valuable, but it was not complete data. So I just wanted you to be aware of that particular fact. One, what it did say, the data from May, I would say in general, is it probably took off the table, at least immediately, the sense that we were in complete and total free fall and the worst pessimistic assumptions were going to come to fruition. Now, that's small comfort if you're in a tourism place that lost everything. I'm not trying to trivialize that in the least. But taken as a whole, we were in much better shape than we could have been. Now, the why of that, a couple of things. One, we're a very well-managed state. That applies to our local governments just like it does to the state. Sometimes I don't think we get enough credit for how well we're running our local governments, as well in most instances. Two, we were coming off some incredibly high sales tax months in front of this. So while the cliff might have looked a little steeper, the truth is you average that out over a fiscal year, we were really doing well. And so that tends to mitigate that issue a little bit. The second is we did have the beginnings of what some of that internet money was coming in. It's hard to isolate it to what it is, et cetera, but clearly there was an expectation there was something out there, and those of us who were looking at it thought there was probably more that was being planned, but I think that tended to take that off a little bit. So I don't want to tell anybody to stop worrying, but when we did the publication that Doug McDonald put together, when we talk about a pessimistic forecast and a conservative forecast, I'd probably err in the direction of conservative as opposed to the pessimistic. I see Juliette nodding, so it makes me feel better saying that particular issue. The other question is you're going to see a more complete data next month. That's not going to come out until the 20th of June. I realize that some final decisions have to get made. It's interesting, the state itself was put off adjusting its forecast until June. Now, we're talking about their budget that they made back in March. This is your first one that you're going to be dealing with the cities, but you're likely to see hopefully some confirmation of this information in June, and maybe even a slight uptick in some of those pictures. But anyway, those are a couple of things that I want to emphasize. The last thing is that also for all the cities on your 50-50 distribution, that one particular sales tax rate, which is sort of the big one, bear in mind half of that is shared throughout the state, which means it's really the state numbers that are driving that as opposed to your local variables. So that's one of those where the 50-50 is oftentimes viewed as the sales tax point of sale rich places are giving up their money. This is where the whole state acts as sort of an insurance policy for everybody. So those are the couple of things I'd emphasize on the data. I think the report that we put, that Connor West put together, has been a pretty good guide. I've heard nothing but positive back about it. I realize we couldn't do every city, but I think it's been extremely useful. I think the direction out of that is, like I said, I'd err more to the conservative than to the pessimistic. We'll see some better data in June, but I wanted to give that caveat on the data in May. And you know, forecasting is it's more than educated guessing, but it is not adding up the numbers from the past. There's a certain risk component in there, and things like the second wave on the virus, all those things are variables we don't know. I'd agree with Vicki. So much of this now is a sort of a confidence level with people to get out and do things, and that's not idealistic. That's a hope. There are people who simply can't do that, but hopefully we're going to be driving some of this comeback from a self-generated economy as opposed to bringing people from the outside in for at least the next little while. And we're going to be back. So anyway, I'll close it with that.
Roger, those were excellent words to finish us up. Nice, upbeat, positive words. Vicki, it is devastating to hear what's happening on the tourism side, but we appreciate the leadership that you and your team are showing to try to get ahead and look around the corner and figure out what do we need in order to have an environment and a climate where people will feel comfortable traveling again and engaging in tourism. Stay tuned for more information about the certification concept. It is something that's come up in multiple conversations with the governor's office and with the legislature. We will post the full town hall on our website. Thank you to both Vicki and Juliette for joining us to recap Juliette's key takeaways. We are in a relatively strong position, and Vicki emphasized that as well. It's good to be in Utah. It always is, but particularly during a pandemic when we see some of the devastating economic data and health data around the country, it's good to be in Utah. So we certainly have challenges. We're working together to tackle those challenges, but it's good to be in Utah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on the panel. Thank you to everyone who attended. Watch for it in the nightly email and on our website. And remember that government closest to the people governs best. Thanks, everyone.